Hello, and welcome to Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Today, we're going to be talking about love, kind of defining what love is the way God says, not the way we say. I think there's an important distinction there. We love him because he first loved us. You'll find that in 1 John chapter 4. Again, we love him because he first loved us. He is the author. He is the creator. If we take that to its logical start, if you believe that God created us, in the beginning, God created us. Male and female, he created us. God made us in his very own image. He is the creator, the sustainer. He made us. He made love. He is the author of it. He knows best what it is. He knows what love is. He is love. For in that same 1 John 4, it says very clearly and succinctly, God is love. God is love. He designed it. He knows it. He tells us what it is and what it is not. What is not loving. Now, I want to put in here, I'm not even going to say a warning, because that would imply maybe something bad or dangerous. But I'm going to say, I am going to talk about, in this sermon, human-to-human intimate interactions. Some good, some not good. Some loving and some not loving. And I think, sadly, this is shied away from in not all, but many pulpits. And I don't think that it should be, because make no mistake, this culture, this world, whose ruler the Bible says is the evil one, is shoving this kind of thing down people's, and especially young people's, throats in a wrong and twisted way. So I think it is a disservice if it's not preached from the pulpit. What is love, and what is the right way and the wrong way to love? So I'm going to talk about that today. But if that's something that you don't want you or people under your dominion to listen to, then I'm just letting you know that ahead of time. You can go listen to a past sermon or another person's sermon. But that is what's going to get talked about today. And don't you think it's important to know what love is and what God says is loving and unloving? We all probably, even people that aren't Christians, may know that verse from Corinthians. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It's a beautiful verse. But if we look at much of Scripture, and in fact, many of the commands and instructions, they can be summed up in how to love God first, and then how to love your neighbor. How to love God and how to love your neighbor. In fact, when Jesus is asked, what's the first of all the commandments? Jesus says, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment, and the second like it is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And he says the same thing similarly in other Gospels. And in one of the Gospels, he says, in Matthew, Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Now, he doesn't say those are the only two commandments. That would be a very, very weak philosophical argument. because Jesus many times quotes many of the other commandments. Many of the commandments deal with how to love God, because God made us. He made the commandments. He tells us how to love Him. And many of the commandments deal with how to love our neighbor, how to love each other. How do we love God, and how do we love each other? Let's look at the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. How to love God. You shall not make for yourself any carved image, any likeness of anything that is in the heavens above, or in the earth beneath, or that is in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation to those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Again, God is telling us how to love Him. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes His name in vain. Again, God's telling us how to love Him. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it. I would submit here this is both. God created us. 6 days of creation, and on the 7th day He rested. God does this. God gives us all the commandments for our good. This one is the one it says to remember, and this sadly is the one a lot of people have forgotten. It's a command to rest every 7th day. To remember God, that He created us and that He commands us to rest. It's a wonderful gift from God. We honor Him by remembering Him, worshiping Him, how to love God. Also a day of rest with the ones that we love. A day of rest to recuperate and kind of reflect on the good things we have in life and the good relationships we have in life. How to love our neighbor. We see that here. Moving on to commandment number 5. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. How to love each other. Now the next several, I'm just going to read. They're pretty evident that this is instruction on how we love each other, our neighbor here on this earth, how we love mankind. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Now, I want to state very clearly, obviously God gave us these commands, and He gave them for our good. It is written, God gave us these instructions for our good. Not only is it loving to God and loving to neighbor, it's good for us. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. We'll get to that. That's in another part of the Bible. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. These are also good for us. It's good for us. It's good for our neighbor. It shows proper worship to God. It's good all around. It is good. It is good to go away from this, to go away from the original intent on how to love each other, love our neighbor, is a perversion. Perversion, the word perverse, to pervert, means to go away from the original. This and many other of these instructions are the original way we are to love God and love our neighbor. When we go away from that, it's perverse. God is very clearly telling us here in many other places how we are to love Him and worship Him. You see, we don't get to decide. You remember when the Israelites were fleeing Egypt and Moses left for 40 days to fast and get these commandments? The Israelites made a molten calf. That's not how we're supposed to love God. That's how pagans do it. They make some image of some fat dude sitting under a tree or some garbage metal trinket, and they've done this throughout history, and you see the Israelites do this. That's not how we're to love God. God is so much bigger and so much more beautiful than what we can form with our own hands. That's saying that you can make something like God. You cannot. God is so much bigger and more beautiful. That's not how God tells us to worship Him, because it's bad for us. Nothing takes power away from God. God is all-powerful. It hurts us when we worship Him in a wrong way. God very clearly tells us how to love Him, and to go away from that is perverse. You are not to make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or earth beneath or that is in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Also, I'll just talk about another one. The 10th, you shall not covet. And sadly, talking about perversion, it seems like a lot of today's culture is breaking and predicated on breaking the 10th commandment. But it's bad for us. It's bad for our neighbor. This coveting, we're told very clearly, do not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, anything that is your neighbor's. Why it's bad for us. Instead of spending time how we're supposed to, focused on God and loving our neighbor, we're focused on what our neighbor has, and not our neighbor himself, on what he has. And jealousy and bitterness, giving birth to full-fledged sin. Talking about coveting your neighbor's wife. If we look at David in the Bible, how does that adulterous relationship begin when he kills one of his trusted men? He sleeps with his wife first and then kills one of his trusted men. It starts just like it did in the Garden of Eden, when Eve looked at the apple and saw that it was pleasing to the eyes. He was pleased by his eyes. He coveted his neighbor's wife. It started with coveting. You covet, and that can give birth to disgusting sin like adultery. But it seems like a lot of today's culture is predicated on coveting. You need a fancy car like your neighbor. You need a house to keep up with the Joneses and that white picket fence like your neighbor. Perhaps that's not what God wants you to have. Perhaps that's not what's good for you. It can end up being bad for them because you can covet something they want and you can actually take it, which hurts them, especially if it's their wife. Or it can hurt you because you're spending all your time focused on what you don't have instead of focusing on what's really important, loving God and loving your neighbor. You see how God is so much wiser than we are. These are good for us. Going back to a very clear one, you shall not commit adultery. That's a shall not. That's not a whatever I feel like. That's not like I don't feel like this or feel like that. It's a you shall not commit adultery. No matter how you feel or the other person feels, it doesn't matter. There's no caveats. It doesn't matter if both parties are okay with it. It doesn't matter if everybody involved says they're okay with it. It doesn't matter. It's a shall not. It's a command from God, not a suggestion, a command. You shall not commit adultery. God telling us how to love each other. That's a very clearly defined and beautiful human relationship given by God. In the beginning, God created them male and female. Jesus even quotes this when he says, "From the beginning it was not so." Jesus says in Matthew, haven't you read? Assuming that you've read and are familiar with his instruction, right? That's important. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made male and female and said, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined, let no one separate. That is the original intention. Marriage between a man and a woman. Period. There is no other. There is no other. Anything else is a perversion. Yes. Anything else is a perversion. A man and a woman come together and become one flesh. Jesus also says in Matthew, whoever divorces his wife except on the grounds of porneia, sexual immorality, makes her an adulteress, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. That's pretty clear. The intention from the beginning, God made us. The very first thing when he made Adam, he said it's not good for man to be alone. It's the very first thing in the Bible God said is not good. Everything else he said, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's very good. He said it's not good for man to be alone. And he made him one man, made him one woman. And they came together, united in marriage, a holy coming together, designed by God. He's the designer of it, not us. We didn't do it. Man didn't go to the dust of the earth and form woman for himself. God did that. He designed it. And we don't get to undesign it and make it whatever we want. He is the designer and author of it. So don't pervert it. Don't go away from the original. That's very clearly how God designed us and designed us to come together physically, among other things, to literally bear fruit, to produce more human life. That's how it was designed. A very clear kind of litmus test. Jesus says in the Bible, a tree is known by its fruit. A tree is known by its fruit, and by your fruits you shall know them. Well, a man and a woman literally produce offspring, a male and a female. That's it. There's no other combination there. It's designed in creation. God made it that way, and you don't get to unmake it that way because you don't like it. Now, we have dumbed down love in our society. We have perverted what we say love is. We have boiled love down to feelings. Whatever I feel. Oh, if I feel like I'm loving somebody, then it's love. Like we get to decide and re-engineer what love is, but you don't. That is beyond your power, that is beyond your scope, and it is sinful to do so. You don't get to design it because you're not the author of it. You don't get to redefine what it is. God already did that, period. And God does not change. It says in the Bible, God changes not. He's not rewriting these commands. And you don't get to either. It's a disservice, not only spitting in the face of God when he tells us something is good and not good and we do it anyway, that's what sin is. It's a disservice to us. Love is so much more than a feeling. Back to that beautiful verse, love is patient. Love is kind. Period. How often do you feel like being patient? If I'm honest, I almost never want to be patient. But it's not about me. God tells me love is patient. So when my wife is really taking longer than I would like on something, God tells me to be patient because he's the author of love. It's not how you feel. It's, again, a disservice to boil love down to feelings. If you're being honest, I think if you've been married for any length of time, there are days when you really don't feel like it. There are days when you really don't feel like you love that other person. That doesn't matter. You still love them. Love is not a feeling. How petty and cheap have we made love that we make it a feeling? Love is so much bigger and stronger than that. And we try to seem like we're being inclusive and helping when we say, oh, love is just whatever you feel. But it's not that. And it's a lie. It's a perversion of the truth. And there are very prescribed ways on what is good and what is right. A very clear distinction. I love my wife. I love my dog. I really do. If people that see me with my dog often comment, he really loves his dog, and I do love my dog. But I don't love my dog the same way that I love my wife. That would be a gross perversion. Because I'm prescribed a certain way to love my wife. It was designed that way by God. I would never, ever want anybody to love their dog the way that I love my wife. Why? Because God designed what love is. They produce according to their kind. It bears fruit when I come together in union with my wife. It's not just about physical pleasure. Now, God designed it. He designed sex, and He designed it to be good and holy and pure, in a marriage bed undefiled, a beautiful thing, with security, without judgment, without fear, without manipulation, trying to get somebody to do this thing or that thing, or stay with you or not stay with you. When you keep it in a marriage bed undefiled, all those fears and worries should go away. And that's a beautiful thing, because that's how God designed it. How petty have we made love if we think love is to fulfill some physical urge? That's a very petty way to look at love. But that's the way culture is telling us, and especially young people, to look at love. It's just to fill some physical yearning and desire, especially at an age when you're pumped full of hormones. No, it's not. No, it's not. That eventually, God willing, can be a way that you can enjoy what God created. But that is not the definition of love. And that is not how we are to love each other. Let's take a look at Leviticus 19. Now, this is in the very same chapter when Jesus quotes, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Not one of the 10 Commandments. Neither is, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." That's from a different book. So not in the 10 Commandments. So when people say only the 10 Commandments apply, I would say, well, Jesus, when He says the greatest 2 commandments, doesn't quote from any of the 10 Commandments. The chapters in the Bible were added much, much later. They were not in the original text. But it's very clear if you go back and look that this is in the same section. It's all tied together. There's no cut and dry. It's not like this was said and then some event happened and then this was said. These are instructions given at the same time. When Jesus says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Let's look at some of the ways to love our neighbor as ourself. "Speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, 'You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, nor make for yourselves molten gods. I am the Lord your God.'" Sure, sounds like wise instruction to me. Let's look a little bit farther on in Leviticus 19. "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God." Sure seems like a good thing on how to love your neighbor, right? Take care of the poor, make sure that they have enough to eat. Make sure that you're not consumed with greed on every little thing. "I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another." Wow, that sure seems like good instruction on how to love our neighbor. "You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. And you shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." Sure sounds like how to love God, how He wants us to love Him. His name is holy. It's not common. It should not be used commonly. It certainly shouldn't be profaned. It is holy. He is holy. We are called to keep Him holy. Revere His name. "You shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not cheat your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of him who is hired shall not remain with you all night until morning. You shall not cheat your neighbor. You shall pay them what they're due." That sure sounds like a good way to love your neighbor. "You shall not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but shall fear your God. I am the Lord." That sure sounds like loving your neighbor to me. Don't take advantage of people's disabilities. Sure sounds loving. "You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord." Again, sure sounds loving to me. Do justice, equal justice under the law. Don't be partial to somebody because you like them or because they have this thing or that thing or don't have this thing. Don't despise them because they're poor or give them special treatment. You judge based on facts. That sure sounds like loving your neighbor, right? Don't go about as a talebearer. Don't spread slanderous rumors. Don't go about talking behind people's backs or spreading rumors that aren't true, being a talebearer. That sure sounds like good ways to love our neighbor, right? Here we go. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Wow, that sure sounds like a good way to love our neighbor. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. If you see your neighbor sinning, I'm going to stop right here and talk on this for a minute because I think we sadly get this wrong in society. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. It is not loving to let somebody wallow in sin. Even if they're enjoying that sin, it hurts them, it hurts the society as a whole. It may even hurt you to look at it. If you know a man who's about to commit adultery on his wife, and he really wants to, and it makes him happy, you should not let him continue in that. You should stop it. You should rebuke him and say, no, this is not the right way. This is wrong. You see somebody wallowing in some kind of sin, whatever it is, if you see them stealing, you should say, no, don't do that. That is bad. That is wrong. We have this thing where we think somehow in today's culture and society, it's unloving to rebuke your neighbor and tell them what they're doing is wrong. It is not wrong. It is loving. It is wrong to let them die in their sin. That's wrong. That's unloving. It's not about feelings. If you make somebody feel bad but you stop them from sinning, that's a victory. If you make them feel really good in their sin, that's an abomination. You shouldn't tell your buddy, oh, if you want to commit adultery and, she's okay with it and your wife's never going to find out about it, that's cool, man. Have fun in your sin. No, that's wrong. And it's wrong in any sin. You rebuke him. You say, no, that's wrong. Don't do that. Don't go down that wrong road. It is a sin. That's the most loving thing to do. Even though he may not like you for it, even though he may not be your friend anymore, even though it may hurt his feelings. Who cares about his feelings? It's the right thing to do. Stop being so concerned about feelings. Be concerned with the truth. How much better would we be as a society if we stopped caring so much about everybody's little hurt feelings and started caring about the truth? You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people. Good advice. Good command. But you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There we go. Jesus says. And as we discussed before, these are kind of how to love God and how to love your neighbor. Well, right before this, in Leviticus, right before the things that I just read, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Here's what it says. Moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. Right? That sure seems like, I don't think many people would argue with that. Even people that aren't Christians, right? You shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. You shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire of Moloch, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Right? I think most people today, even in culture, would admit that child sacrifice is wrong. But how about this one? You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. It's bad. It's a perversion of what God designed. And it is not loving to tell somebody that's okay. Just like it's not loving to tell somebody it's okay to commit adultery. Even if it hurts their feelings, you tell them it is wrong. You rebuke them. That is the right and proper thing to do. That is actually loving, as opposed to what culture says, do whatever you feel that love is. No, you didn't design love. You're not the author of love. You don't get to decide what love is and what love is not. God tells you what it is, and he says this is not good. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. The very next sentence. You shall not mate with any animal to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is perversion. Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these things the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. You see, we've been here before in culture. The street signs look familiar. We think that this is some new thing that we've discovered, a better way to love than these archaic ways that were given, than our Puritan forefathers. No, we've perverted it, and it's not the first time. We were so bad before that God had to destroy the entire earth, save Noah and the ark. We've been here before. Or how about Sodom and Gomorrah? Does that ring a bell? Don't go down this road as an individual, as a culture. Don't let your neighbor go down this road. That's not what love is. Love is not whatever you decide, whatever makes you feel good. Again, this is not the first time. If you look, it says, "Do not defile yourself with any of these things, for by all these things the nations are defiled." Going back to Jesus, many people would say, well, that's Old Testament. I would say, it's Jesus. Have you never read the Gospel of John? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. Let's chew on that theologically for a minute. All things were created through him. He is the Word, this very same Word we just read. And guess where Jesus was? In the beginning, in creation, when man was made male and female, distinctly female. Only two categories, male and female. And you don't get to decide which one of those you're born as. God does that. Jesus is there. When Jesus quotes, "Man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Why? Because he was there in creation and designed it. In the beginning was the Word. The same word we just read in Leviticus. That is Jesus. There is only one God. He doesn't change. Jesus is that God made man. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, we read in that very same beginning of the Gospel of John. And the Word became flesh. He became flesh, born of a virgin, born from Mary some 2,000 years ago. But he didn't start there. In the beginning. In the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You don't get to pick and choose Think about that theologically. He is that Word. He is those 10 commandments. He is the instructions in the Torah. He is the great I am. Not the I was and I changed. The I am. The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. It's all Christ. And if that wasn't clear enough, if you need some clarity from after the death of Jesus, from 1 Corinthians, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners will inherit the kingdom of God. That's pretty strong and succinct language from 1 Corinthians 6. It's all God. He doesn't change. He decides what love is. He tells us what love is and what love is not. He tells us what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. He tells us what is the design that he designed and what is a perversion of that. We don't get to change that. To say, God, I know what you're saying is good and right in the way you designed it, but I'm going to do my own thing. That's sin. That's what sin is in a nutshell. Saying, God, I know you say not to do this thing, but I don't want to do it and I'm not gonna. That's sin. Or to say, God, I know you're telling me to do this thing, but I don't want to do it. That's sin. That's sin. Any perversion, any going away from the original design and the instructions is sin. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this: You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these.